one other memory creeps in, making me shiver all over. A lady completely unknown to me, in appearance well-spoken and well-educated, came to the studio. Her name was Margaret, a high school teacher from Sydney, visiting her friends who attended Merva's group, and had apparently heard so many great things about me. I offered her a cup of coffee in the coffee lounge around the corner. She insisted talking to me about something very important, and needed to do it during that very last day of her stay in Perth, and told me she had heard wonderful things about my fame, deciding to see me. Ardently explaining, she spoke all about her profession as a modern history teacher at one of the prominent high schools in Sydney, and exclaimed that the school principal, just like those others from the education department in New South Wales, were all anti-her. I asked her why, and she explained in her unique mannerism that she was very depressed, especially when, after almost every class, many of her students, particularly the boys, were unacceptably boisterous and laughing at her. She was advised to consider a medically necessitated dismissal or voluntary redundancy after so many years of service as their teacher. She asked over and over again about what could be the right course of action if she was forced into medical retirement. By that time I had already analyzed her predicament and knew how sensitive this issue was. I asked her a series of questions, one of which was about what she really wanted to do. She answered me that she loved spending much time in ashrams, and the Hindu or Buddhist belief systems appealed to her. She even inquired if I was familiar with the great Indian guru Sai Baba, asking me why I had the same eyes like benevolent Sai. Although I had met Sai Baba during my travels, I could not detect any likeness, and was not one of his devotees. She was also eager to know if I was likely to visit Sydney again, as she seemed to remember seeing me there when I was lecturing. Obviously, she did not have much time left before her flight to Sydney, and I had to get back to my studio. She suggested that if I went to Sydney, I could stay at her address in Cremorne. Strangely, I had once stayed in that lovely suburb for several months, but her address was not in the same street. It was just around the corner in Young Street. Before she left, she said that in the meantime we could communicate over the phone, even though it could be a little expensive, or perhaps we could write to each other. In truth, she appeared to be adamant in trying to pull the strings. I had too many people claiming to be my friends, and at the same time trying to design my life according to their standards and desires. Unfortunately, she proved herself to be a persistent headache. I know it sounds harsh. However, it was as if there was nothing more important than her case in everybody's life. She kept calling me a little too often, in fact, on a daily basis, especially during most inappropriate and unsuitable times, without listening to what she was told, ignoring everybody else's needs, urgently asking many questions and obliging me to make predictions about her future. The whole situation became impossible. From then on, I was frightened about my telephone ringing and listening to Margaret's complaints for longer and longer periods of time. It seemed it did not matter whether I was busy with a client, eating, having a bath, or sleeping. She chose to call me at the most inappropriate times, demanding my attention. I started to hate telephones. She truly rendered herself a nightmare, intruding into my personal space uninvited, and kept questioning me about what I would do if I was in her shoes, obliging me to answer her with the same responses for a very long time. In short, she was relentless, endlessly repeating her same questions. I frequently advised her to follow her own intuition first and foremost, and not my or anybody else's advice. It became so unbearable, making me feel extreme mental fatigue, so that I could not even concentrate upon my own interests anymore, and could not cope with this additional stress. There were times I attempted to speak tactfully and deliberately about having personal problems I needed to take care of, but she either ignored what was said or took it as if I was starving and needing financial help, often explaining that she had spent much money for her travels and phone calls, proudly praising her own self in doing so. At times she spoke over the phone about sex, asking me why I was never interested in it. At other times she asked me when would be the right time for me to consider marrying her. She frequently accused me of advising her to leave her teaching career, and that therefore I should look after her. She relentlessly questioned me whether it was my secret agenda or my alleged desire to marry her. None of it made any sense. To begin with, she did not know me at all, and certainly did not want to know what my background or family situation was. Once she sent a Christmas gift in the form of a small sum of money, which Lee and I shared having a nice dinner in the city, for which I thanked her. As time went on, she claimed she had apparently sent other little gifts like that, but in all honesty I have not seen them, and wondered if she had sent them to the correct address, if at all, or were they secretly taken without my knowledge by my young assistant. Much later, she annoyingly asked me if all the monies she had forwarded to me were used for Muslim terrorist groups. Did she by any chance think that I was a member of a Middle Eastern terrorist organization? If so, why? That was enough for me to desire to escape from her. You can guess what we were dealing with. She was unfortunately leading me into more stress and depression in my life, while hoping and pressuring me to further some form of interest to marry her. She elected to continue with this unique behavior pattern, and being unwilling to hurt anyone, I kept swallowing all that nonsense for the sake of peace. When she ended her supposedly vital phone calls, I always wished she would never call me again, giving me some time to concentrate on my own needs. I was certain that as an educated person, she was capable of making her own decisions, yet claimed that I had suggested she leave her employment. But I did not. She did it herself. Besides, if she had not done so, she was going to be medically dismissed. I cannot imagine why I indeed to put up with something like that. She was very keenly interested in everything Indian and Hindu, everything related to spiritual or New Age philosophies. She was of Scottish and Irish descent, did not get along with her mother, hoping that she would choose to stay with her other daughter in the States. She said that her sister was a nurse, and her mother suffered mild dementia. My conclusion was that Margaret had a very confused childhood, and was seeking answers from all kinds of gurus about life, as with other followers of Sai Baba, whom she worshipped. She had been spending a lot of time in retreats and ashrams, where she found solace, acceptance, and trust. She opposed everything science-related, technology, and new discoveries. She interpreted my not being interested in sex as a sign of belonging to a branch of Sai Baba worship. Sai was known to conjure up supposed miracles, spending considerable time with young boys and teenagers in his private quarters, while rewarding them with gold chains and watches he magically produced from under his sleeves. He encouraged his followers to partake in having a form of ash he produced from his body, and some of his followers, as I have witnessed, were rubbing themselves with it, or even putting it in their mouths, considering it as a blessing. All the adherents to his teachings were extremely devoted to him, as was Margaret. However, everybody is entitled to believe in whatever they choose. Some take myths, cultist movements, and guru worship to extremes, as it was in olden days. When certain kinds of attitudes from people surface, they tend to develop unusual characteristics. Some develop depression and confusion about their world, as they are constantly encouraged to consider it in a very negative light. Margaret was a person of extremes, unnecessarily serious and devoted to any faith as the wind blew. In reality, she was dedicated to all of them and strict with her undertakings. This may be why she was also so extreme with those students teasing her. She was unable to control them and kept complaining about the boys in particular. She was therefore advised, after much soul-searching and consideration, that she should contemplate taking medical retirement, but she was obviously concerned about losing her regular income, and her mother was not making it easy for her. She sought advice from other gurus and psychics, and in the process became more confused about what to do. I could not advise her for or against anything other than tell her to follow her own heart. She constantly told me that she was. In her dreaming mind, she believed that nobody could help her other than Suren. She had developed a high sense of pride in which she believed she was knowledgeable of all things, trying to convince everybody that she was fully cognizant of all life circumstances and understood how life worked. Advice given at any level had to be very cautiously executed. She believed that I had to be a reflection of Sai Baba. Therefore, I was allegedly a very trustworthy psychic, a mystic, and therefore real. This was so foreign to me. I was surprised that somebody like all-knowing Margaret, who had only met me a short while ago, was apparently able to assess and know everything which needed to be known about my personal characteristics. Who knows, maybe she could enlighten me about my real self and my hidden secrets I had no previous knowledge of. Although I have researched a number of belief systems and cultist ideals people around the world adhere to, I do not follow any religious practice, and wondered if she knew it also. One could assume that she might have discovered, perhaps even psychically, what my cultural background was. Did she also know all about the real me with my professional background? Did she know I was an established artist and research scientist? In reality, she preferred to see me only as a trustworthy medium between the physical realm and higher dimensions. Nothing to the contrary could be explained to her. She also often spoke of another gentleman in most favorable terms. He was writing a book in regard to space-related existences like me. She said that she could love him, but was always told by a woman that he was busy. There was always a woman in those men's lives, and they were like doorkeepers in front of them, ever ready to hinder her from approaching them. She questioned why it was always the same. She was very keen for me to visit Sydney, repeatedly asking me to stay at her place, meet her mother, and even draw her portrait. I could no longer advise her about what to do. in regard to her career in any way other than asking her what she really wanted to do. I did not desire to be responsible. She kept persistently asking me what I would do if I was in her position. In fact, if I had such a trauma and facing the prospect of medical redundancy due to my psychological state, I would do the most logical thing. In other words, I would seek the help of a practicing psychologist. She asked me again and again, "Do you mean I should leave? But if I did so, how would I occupy myself? Should I start doing more creative things?" She then almost always added that perhaps she could spend more time at ashrams. Obviously, her self-esteem had suffered greatly, and that was not healthy. However, what kind of creative things did she consider doing in those ashrams she spoke of? Margaret occupied my mind completely, unnecessarily, and far too often. She was not giving me any chance to think and be creative other than advising her repeatedly towards more positive thinking. Apart from my own problems and needs, I had to occupy my mind with her personal issues, responding to her unending questions for hours every day. It was tiring me. In fact, I was beginning to suffer from mental fatigue and desired just to sleep to escape the world that surrounded me. I was overly stressed. Whenever I had time to myself to think about my own needs and concerns or be creative and happy, she bombarded me with her own concerns. I developed a severe phobia towards her phone calls, forcing me to wait until the answering machine started recording before I could respond to anybody. When I heard her voice, I preferred to ignore it, and by doing so was able to create some semblance of peace in my inner world. When I did answer her, she kept telling me all about her dreams, taking hours in doing so. I decided to invest in a speakerphone, which sounded like a radio set. This way, I could let her talk while I did things freely, like going to the toilet or kitchen, when home at night, or on weekends. One weekend, early in the morning, Margaret called me on the telephone, and I put the handset with the loudspeaker on the coffee table, with her voice telling me all about her dreams, and went on into the city for a while. And after 3 hours, arriving home, I discovered she was still telling me all about her dreams. Then I spoke to her in just a few short sentences and wished her a good day. She said she would call me next morning to tell me the rest of her dreams. Whenever she left messages on my answering machine, she ceaselessly told me all about her life stories, not leaving any room for other people to leave their messages. This way, some of my prospective clients were lost. I never advised her to leave her teaching career or retire. I left it entirely to her and to more appropriate people to help her decide. Somehow Margaret interpreted my reactions as if I had definitely advised her to leave the teaching position under some form of spiritual guidance, that I was likely to look after her, as if I was in love with her. This assumption on her part might have been due to my specialized lectures to the general public, when I used sentences declaring how we need to care for ourselves and how everybody needed to love one another unconditionally. Could it perhaps be the reason she inquired why we did not need to express our love intimately in this human world? That was puzzling.